Yesterday we were talking a lot about, about aggression and about anger and how to deal with that.
Yep.
How can young people, I suppose, best navigate when they detect that the air's a little bit thicker in the house,
Yeah.
and the tension is also there as well? How can they mitigate that space where they can keep themselves safe?
What a good question. Okay. A very good question, because you're right. Kids are witnessing things and absorbing things, and regardless of how young they are, kids of 3, 4 and 5 are more than capable of working out what's happening around them. And you're right, it does actually work out as being fear for them, yeah? And they start getting very anxious and frightened. So the way that I would suggest is that, if you know that your kids, are feeling a bit emotionally vulnerable, then there's nothing like a good hug and a sit down. And again, try and age appropriately, find the right language, but explain to them, that I know Mommy raved and shouted, and I'm sorry that I did it, but I'm tired, or I'm worn out, or, and you just sit and you explain it to kids. That's the 101 of it. Don't presume that they don't understand, because they do. And the other thing I would suggest, and this is a therapeutic tool that is used when you're working with kids who are, extremely stressed, and have what you would call like panic attacks. What I would suggest is that you imagine that you're in a bell jar. You're like, there's a big jar around you, and you're completely safe inside that jar. You can see outside, you can hear outside the jar, but it's a way of using your imagination to keep you safe. And it's actually a technique that people use in, war-torn countries and stuff of that nature. Yeah? So very, very highly skilled psychologists in, places like Gaza and places like that. It's a fundamental technique that they choose to teach children, yeah? Sit yourself down, sit in a little corner, imagine in your mind that you're inside a bubble, yeah, a glass jar or a bubble, and that you're completely safe in there. I know it sounds very simple, but it actually is a very, very effective tool. And parents and caregivers could sit down and teach kids how to do that, yeah? And it's also about giving them 2 or 3 minutes of complete calm. It's like a calm bubble, yeah? But your point is very well made, no, Doc, yeah? That we're all trying to hold ourselves together. We're all trying to be the best we can under really challenging circumstances. And you do need to be aware that kids absorb all of this, every single bit of it. Yeah.
And it isn't the responsibility of a young person also to hold parents accountable for their behaviour, because they really are not in that position of power where they make all the decisions in the household.
Yeah.
So it really is the responsibility of the leader of the house to really take note and take stock of what they are doing and how they are reacting. And for a young person, it can be a little bit confusing and a little bit disheartening as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, there is an age limit to this, but equally, kids from 4 or 5 years of age are perfectly capable of telling you how they feel. And as the leader, the person in charge of the family, it takes courage, but it's perfectly appropriate to sit down with a child and say, how are you feeling? I know that you just overheard or you just witnessed something that I wish you hadn't, yeah? But I just need to ask you, how are you feeling? And try and deal with the reality, yes? You're right that it's not their responsibility, but it is the responsibility of the adults to try and find a way for kids to share how they feel, yeah? And that's quite a big ask, when you've lost your temper, and I'm not saying this because I'm perfect, in this last week and a half, trust me, there are a couple of times when I've lost my temper and then had to look around to make sure the doors and windows were closed so the neighbours didn't hear me. It's true, yeah. I put it down to being Welsh. Yeah, we're very passionate human beings, and when we've got something to say, we tend to say it very loudly. But my point is that it was, my kids are older. They're in the late 20s. But what I'm trying to make sure that I do is, that 5 or 10 minutes after I've done the things I suggested yesterday, because I do them, yeah. Take myself into a corner, breathe 10 times, and actually just concentrate on breathing, count backwards, and just, the question I filtered to myself is this really important? Yeah? I mean, am I responding because I'm frightened? Which actually is why most people lose their temper at any one side. Yeah? What is it I'm frightened about? Because it's not actually, the last thing I want to do is be angry with the people that I love. I don't want to upset them. I don't want to rock their boat. I don't want to do that, yeah? But equally, I'm human. So the point is, it's about, for adults, taking responsibility for what happened, not pretending that it didn't happen, yeah? Finding the courage to say what I said and how I behaved was wrong, yeah? I shouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
And, isn't that all any of us really want when we're irritated or angry or upset by the way somebody's treated us? We want them to genuinely look at us in the face and say, I'm sorry. And usually that's enough for most of us, yeah?
Yep.
But it's difficult, isn't it, to even find the words to say you're sorry when you're angry and you're irritated and you're what I call, you're in the I must be right corner with your arms folded. It's hard. It's hard. And I'll give you another piece, advice, and this is what I've learned through my career. That sometimes when you're in the middle of an argument and everybody's upset, it's quite difficult to do that, isn't it? It's quite difficult to be positive. But it's like yesterday when we were talking about that anger and that when you're tipping into a place where you're being cruel, where you're being nasty, where you're using your voice and sometimes physically, overbearing because you're driven, yes? You go past that point of actually being in control of what comes out of your mouth. Now, what I would say is that it's at those moments in these kind of situations where you really, really, really have to dig deep and have control over yourself and walk, yeah? Because it's very difficult to mend a relationship quickly when you've done that kind of behaviour, yeah? And it's, it's not something that can be resolved in 5 minutes. When you have been, we're going into the abusive, where you're actually, I'm not going to say, well, you're out of control. You know what I'm saying, yeah? When we go into what I call white rage. So anybody who's listening to this and anybody who knows anybody whose personality type and behaviour works like that, maybe in a quiet time when we're not in a conflict, it might be a good idea to sit them down and say, when you get to that point, what is it I can do? Can I show you a sign or a trigger or whatever to let you know you're crossing the line? You now need to out of here for all of our sakes, yeah? One of the techniques you can do is just literally lift your hand up, yeah? And just show your hand and people will, whoever you're talking to can see, okay, that's it. You're now crossing that boundary. You are frightening me with your behaviour.
We're going to leave it there, Sian. Thank you so much again for taking the time out to have a cordial with us. We'll look forward to talking to you again tomorrow.